Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you who are phoning in. My name is Robert Amsterdam. I am an international lawyer tasked by the Turkish government to investigate the activities of Fethullah Gülen outside of Turkey. To my left is Patrick J. Egan at Fox Rothschild, who is an attorney of record in the new suit that has been launched against Fethullah Gülen in Pennsylvania. Today we are going to be talking about two separate subjects. One is the American lawsuit against Mr. Gulen for various violations of human rights, illegal imprisonment of religious opponents in Turkey, and in fact the instrumentalization of the judiciary and the police in Turkey to further his ends. And we are then going to talk about the activities of the Gulen organization in the United States, where it appears they may be one of the largest foreign interveners in American political activity. The Gulen organization has 130 charter schools. These schools take in hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, and we are going to be discussing how those schools have been used to proselytize in the United States in respect to the Gulen movement. But first, I would like to deal with the question of who is Fethullah Gülen. And I think it's very important in America today to make it very clear that whatever comments are made here are in no way intended to be a reflection on Islam, on our respect for Islam, and in no way should be in any way adding to the present furor and absolutely unspeakable remarks that have been made by Mr. Trump and others in this campaign. In respect to Mr. Gulen, he has been considered by many something of a human rights hero. A book written in this country about his tribulations in Turkey is entitled Wrestling with Free Speech, Religious Freedom and Democracy in Turkey, The Political Trials of Fethullah Gülen. On the other hand, inside Turkey, he is known as someone who has seriously corrupted the judicial system, the police, and various other aspects of the Turkish government. In an article recently published, words attributed to him were uttered during a closed-door conversation. These words were broadcast some years ago. Quote, "The existence of our comrades is the guarantee of the future of Islam. From this aspect, their presence in the law courts or in the civil service or in other service sectors, the existence of our comrades cannot be evaluated as being out of individual obligation. Rather, in these units, they are the guarantee for our future. Without having formed a strong front in the constitutional institutions, any step we take will be too early. Until you have reached the correct saturation, until you have the strength to carry the world on your back, until you have laid claim to those things that represent power, until you have formed a powerful front in all of the constitutional institutions that are equivalent to the formation of the state in Turkey, every step you take will be a step too early." His active involvement in the political situation in Turkey is only exemplified by his activities in the United States of America. With these 130 schools, he has been involved in a massive program of political contributions, and we'll get to that. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Egan of Fox Rothschild to talk about the new litigation that's been brought in Pennsylvania. Mr. Egan.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The case that we've brought in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania is a case that's been brought by three individual plaintiffs. And they are three individuals who are members of a religious group in Turkey that disagrees with the teachings of Mr. Gulen. And that individual is, that group is essentially led by an individual or follows the teachings of an individual by the name of Mehmet Dogan. Folks who believe in those teachings and people who have followed those teachings were persecuted by the Gulen movement and were persecuted through actions that began in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, where Mr. Gulen presently resides. And the actions that were taken was to set forth a conspiracy that would cause individuals who are followers of Dogan to be falsely imprisoned, falsely accused, have evidence planted against them that was planted by members of the Gulen movement, done at the direction of Mr. Gulen and through his agents in Turkey. And those particular actions violate what is called the Alien Tort Statute here in the United States. And the Alien Tort Statute is a statute that provides that any individual acting in the United States who causes actions that take place in other countries that are violations of international human rights norms, that is, violations of what the International Human Rights community believes to be appropriate and the rightful acts of countries, when they are violated by actions such as false imprisonment, such as taking people's property without due process, and other significant violations of human rights, those actions are actionable under the Alien Tort Statute. And this complaint alleges that these three individuals were essentially placed in incarceration without proper evidence, with evidence that was planted through the conspiracy, and their liberty was taken from them for more than up to 20 months. This caused a great deprivation. It is clearly done because of their religious belief. It is clearly done as a basis of their religious belief, and it is clearly done in violation of the Alien Tort Statute. And as a result, this complaint has been brought on behalf of these three individuals against Gulen and against a number of John Does in his organization. And the reason that the John Does have been named in the complaint is because we are unaware yet of the exact names of the individuals who we believe worked in concert with him, or we have knowledge about those individuals but not sufficient to include them in this complaint. But the evidence that we have obtained through interviews of individuals who are plaintiffs in this case and the other external evidence that's been developed in this investigation has led to the filing of this complaint, which will be brought forth in the Middle District of Pennsylvania and which will hopefully use the United States courts to have a just resolution and a civil resolution of this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. The issue in this case should resonate with those in Turkey because this case follows a long line of Turkish cases where Mr. Gulen and his acolytes have allegedly falsely imprisoned individuals in Turkey. In this case, it was done through videos released here where he compared his religious detractors to Al-Qaeda and made allegations that they were somehow involved in violent activities. In respect to the United States, since we've had our first press conference, there have been a series of developments. First, the exposure of what appears on their face to be systemic illegal political contributions in the United States by Gulen followers, which resulted in Senator Kelly Ayotte returning $43,000. And then we have received a significant amount of evidence from various whistleblowers throughout the United States concerning the situation of Turkish teachers in the Gulen schools. Now, I want to say that when our government tells us that they need to tap our phones and get our emails to detect subversive activity, you do have to wonder, with all of the complaints that have been launched about Gulen schools in the United States, how it is that there appears to have been so little action in dealing with an organization that I believe we will be able to demonstrate has been proselytizing among U.S. school children in the United States with taxpayer money. Because as early as 2005, August 4th, in a WikiLeaks document from the station in Ankara, the U.S. Officer there had this to say, quote, "We have multiple reliable reports that the Gulenists use their school network, including dozens of schools in the United States, to cherry-pick students they think are susceptible to being molded as proselytizers, and we have steadily heard reports about how the schools indoctrinate boarding students." Now, from 2005 to today, these allegations have existed. I can tell you that we appear to be on the verge of developing very solid evidence to prove this. You will see a board over there. That board was handed to us by one of the whistleblowers. The evidence that has come forth from a number of them concerning this relates to monthly activity that involves essentially the teachers targeting 3 or 4 core students for enhanced attention and for essentially additional programming by the teachers in respect to these students and their families. And they're judged on a point system relating to extracurricular activities, which I think if you manage to fulfill them, probably means that you're working about 100 to 150 extra hours a month. Now, this raises 2 issues. One, why was this proselytizing carried out in secret? Because we are told, in fact, that in the Gulen schools, the Turkish teachers form cells, form specific groups that meet weekly to discuss their success in respect to these proselytizing or movement issues. And their bonus for reaching their target is ultimately a visit to the leader in Pennsylvania. So the question becomes, if this activity is innocent, why is it hidden? And this is one of the big questions concerning all of the schools. There is an absolute dual state operating in each school. American teachers will tell you, and Turkish teachers will tell you. And that dual state is as follows. The Turkish teachers are basically treated as indentured servants. There is a tremendous amount of evidence that demonstrates that, contrary to the mythology, the Gulen schools pick teachers without experience because they're not interested as much in any academic development as they are in the proselytizing factor. I was told by one American teacher that in many years of working in the Gulen school, there was not one teacher from Turkey that they felt ever came close to meeting the proper credentials. Now, you have to ask yourself, with over 5,000 highly questionable H-1B visas involving the sending over of young Turkish males largely to North America, in fact, more H-1Bs than Google. And you go back years when there was a mass surplus of teachers. How is this possible in the United States that so little has been done to deal with this phenomenon? Because clearly the United States didn't need anything like that level of teachers. And what is even more scandalous has come out in a number of audits of charter schools that were conducted both in Georgia and in LA, and I'll quote, payments for immigration fees, this is out of LA United, Murph's payments for immigration fees and immigration lawyers in the past 4 years totaled $206,000. In some of the Gulen schools, the amount paid for immigration lawyers comes close to the amount paid for textbooks. This is where American taxpayer money is going. And it's worse. It's worse because the political contributions that went to candidates on both sides of the aisle, including what appears to be a massive contribution to some of the foundations around some of these aspirants, all of this money, or not all, it would appear a large part of this money may well have come from teachers who were forced to give back income to the movement. In fact, we have information that anywhere from 10 to 40% of the income goes back to the movement in one form or another. Now, in addition to the monies going back, often in cash, often we realize to further the political influence in the United States, we have the conditions of the Turkish teachers. Many of those conditions, the testimony has been that many of those Turkish teachers have very little control over their ability to function in the United States beyond going in and doing tremendously excessive hours of work, day after day, week after week, and month after month. If you add together the questionable H-1B visas and the holding back of income, you get very close to violations of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. In other words, human trafficking. That's a very serious allegation, but when you actually read the definitions, as was reported in the Tornado case, to establish a claim of forced labor, plaintiffs must show that defendants knowingly provided or obtained plaintiff's labor by means of a scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause the person to believe that if that person did not perform such labor or services, that person or another person would suffer serious harm or physical restraint. Serious harm is defined as any harm, whether physical or non-physical, including psychological, financial, or reputational harm. Well, it is absolutely uncontroverted that really very significant financial resources were taken from the teachers and put in the hands of the movement, either to further their political power or to further their activities on this proselytizing. And one of the things I can tell you is that the movement operates in an atmosphere of fear and deception. This is the most deceptive movement or organization that in 35 years of operating in Russia, in Africa, I have ever seen. Individuals in these schools that are Turkish adopt American false names in many situations. The people who are involved with money in these schools who are Turkish strive to change their names so they can look American on websites. The schools themselves do not admit they are Gulen schools. They say that they are, quote, inspired by Gulen, even though we have testimony that there are basically imams for each region who control the schools through the Turkish principles, all of which are men, all of which ensure that there's a massive amount of cross-pollination between all of these schools. And what is important is that this deception and this conduct that is far more befitting a criminal organization than an educational organization, Gulen is aware. They are aware that their conduct is inappropriate because they have their own staff of cleaners. They have their own staff of people they dispatch into the schools to download computers and phones of the Turkish teachers to make sure there is no connection or detail going to American regulatory or police services. Many of the Turkish teachers are in fear of their continued ability to stay in this country. And that is why we want to point out the report at robertamsterdam.com where Turkish teachers can report to us. They can do it not from their own phones, but from internet cafes. And we are prepared to, and we have retained some of the top immigration experts in the United States to assist them should they wish to provide information to us concerning these ongoing investigations. I want to also stress that what we're saying in terms of the management of these schools can all be independently verified by public documents that relate to Fulton schools in Georgia and the LA schools in respect to the lack of financial discipline. The proselytizing and what goes on in the schools, we're getting now from our whistleblowers, and we are looking, obviously, for more and more evidence as the investigation widens in the United States. Today, one of our lawyers is in California at the a public hearing in respect to a further expansion of this network. Now, again, one has to ask, with all of the FBI raids, with all of the audits, with all of the actual determinations in Ohio and other states that these schools are falling behind, that these schools are not meeting any form of standards, that they are continuing to operate in a way so as to maximize the importation of generally poorly qualified Turkish teachers for whom English is not their first language. You have to ask yourself why American politicians continue to take trip after trip to Turkey sponsored by the Gulen organization. Our ask today is that those politicians return the money to Gulen. Our ask today is that at the state, local, and federal level, investigations are launched into these allegations, into these activities. And a determination is made as to why this level of penetration, why American students are being allowed to be proselytized by a foreign religious body on American soil with American taxpayer money, why that is being allowed to go on, and why the United States government, with notice from 2005 to today, has done so little about it. So to those politicians who say, we didn't realize what was going on, we can now draw a line under that and say, since Representative Senator Kelly Ayotte has returned the money, you are on notice. This situation is serious. Turkey is an important ally. It has made its files available to the United States in respect to this individual. And this massive growth of the Gulen network in the United States should be halted until these activities are investigated. And I want to make two things clear as I end. Number one, there are, I am sure, many honest and legitimate followers of Mr. Gulen who have no activity or relationship with the American schools, but who are disciples and followers. This is not meant to be a criticism of everyone who follows his teachings. But what it is meant to do is raise serious questions about the governance of these schools in the United States, and sadly and tragically about the governance in the United States of its educational system, which has basically allowed the management of that system to go over to foreign interests that are not serving the interests of the American taxpayer. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. You're with today's Zaman?
No, Janice.
Go ahead.
Okay, my question is about Mehmet Doğan case, which on tax case in Turkey. Are you aware of the fact that the person you just mentioned, Mehmet Doğan, has declared his deep admiration to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in the live TV broadcast?
Let's, again, that is disputed, and that is exactly what Mr. Gulen has been saying, and that's what Mr. Gulen said before these fabricated. Well, that's fine. We have seen Mr. Gulen's broadcast. We have seen the armaments that were planted there. Do you have a question?
No, my question is
Thank you.
detail about the case that you are opening in Pennsylvania? Like, on which basis, other than this specific criteria that you use against Gulen in Turkey, like causing false imprisonment in Turkey?
Under the Alien Tort Claims Act, you can bring an action in the United States for activities that take place outside of the United States. And under that act, these allegations in respect to what his followers were doing in Turkey, the fact that he has essentially established control over the courts and the police in Turkey, that's what the case is about. And I should say to the American audience who's not familiar with these allegations, Professor Danny Roderick of Harvard has a blog which relates to the role of Gulen in the Ergenekon case. And this Harvard professor has made a very strong case in respect to, in that case, very similar conduct, the planting of false information, the mobilization of the police, the mobilization of the courts in Ergenekon. So I would suggest to you reading that blog can be very worthwhile.
Do you still receive death threats or other kind of threats to your office or your?
I will tell you that one day they largely stopped. About a week or 2 weeks after the press conference, somebody gave an order, because I think the level of anti-Semitic content to those threats was very embarrassing to the movement. So it's not stopped, and this will probably prompt more, but it's been greatly decreased. I would also say to you that in 35 years of doing really fairly explosive political cases, I've never seen the level of intimidation that I've seen in this case. I've had really learned Islamic scholars and others provide us with information on the strict understanding their names could never come out, because they've told me, your reputation will be destroyed and I don't want to go down with you. No one who touches this man isn't burnt, to quote a journalist, a famous journalist who was jailed in Turkey. That is the perception of independent academics on American campuses today. And when you see the impunity with which this organization seems to operate, I understand it. I understand the fear.
You said that many congresspersons return their money who received from the Gulen movement. Is there any other examples you can share with us after you started the investigation?
No, I want to make it clear. We only know of one that's returned their funds.
Only one?
Only one has returned their funds. My hope is that there will be more, specifically as it appears that some of these funds may well be the monies of poor teachers who have had this money taken from them. And then, if you read the USA Today analysis, some of the people who had donated this money didn't live in the state and couldn't remember whether it was a man or woman they donated to or what the circumstances were. Those straw voters who gave these monies, I'm sure, will be the subject of further U.S. investigation, because it violates any number of U.S. laws.
Regarding that human trafficking, how can you be sure they are doing that human trafficking? Or can you give us more, the numbers?
Look, in respect to human trafficking, it seems to come within the definition. All we can do, because so many of these people are in fear of their immigration status, is interview those who will come forward, who have the courage to come forward. One of the things that's fascinating is in a number of cases, they notified the FBI before they came to us, and there was absolutely no follow-up. The American teachers at these schools, I spoke to one woman last night who called them indentured slaves. This is an American using those terms, because every time the school needed anything they sent the young Turks to get it. Even though they were teachers, they were treated like handymen. And this is the perception of a very senior American in the administration of some of these schools. You know, one of the things that's really happened in this massive school investigation is I've spoken to so many people who have never been spoken to before. They were there, they could have provided evidence to others, but nobody's really asked a lot of those questions. And we anticipate, as this goes forward, there will be more and more of those people coming forward. Because one of the things I learned as a young lawyer years ago is when you do things in secret, it is a badge of dishonesty. And the amount of secrecy that goes on within these schools, the false names, the cleaners, the charts that only Turkish teachers were allowed to see, the deceptiveness in terms of taking cash from people on H-1B visas, that's universally accepted as going on, by the way. Just like the penetration in Turkey by Gulen of the courts and the police are universally accepted, whether you're with the opposition or the government. Those things are accepted facts. Well, it's outrageous. Firstly, it's outrageous that it exists in Turkey, but it's even more outrageous that that level of deception and secrecy can exist in an organization that is receiving public funds in the United States. It is a double fraud, if you will.
Are you planning another legal action?
Yes. We're planning, there will be more legal actions, but our hope is that more school districts and more American organizations will take up these investigations and at least end the secrecy so we can all understand what's been going on in these schools. I'm speaking to you weeks before I plan to meet with you again because I've become so concerned about this issue, not only of proselytizing, but of the fact that so many of these people have such fear in coming forward. And we have to break that cycle of fear and intimidation. And I include within that even those poor academics I spoke to who are involved in Turkish studies and afraid to even speak to me because they feel that Gulen has such power in the United States that it will damage their careers. When people in Washington want to know about politics, they turn to Daily Zaman. That's the newspaper they know. A newspaper that is to Turkish politics what Scientology is to American religion. But that becomes the source of record. So this fear continues, and it's a self-fulfilling situation. The fear builds on fear, and the Gulen schools grow. And if we think it's bad in the United States, let's talk about investigations we're starting in Holland and investigations we're starting in Africa, where there isn't the institutional accountability, and where we know Gulen is targeting the elite, and we know that Gulen is focused on developing cadres in these African countries that follow his orders. This represents a threat to the national security of many countries. The African Union has just agreed to 1,000 schools, and Mrs. Zuma has just won the Gulen Award for Peace. I mean, this is one of the other incentives Mr. Gulen does. He sets up various peace prizes. He has his own self-referential system of media that continues to augment the reputations of those who support him and attack those who are in any way critical. Yes, sir.
Well, you mentioned Holland, you mentioned Africa. Anywhere else in Europe, in the West?
Yes, I mean, we're looking at this globally, and we're going to go wherever we feel we need to. We know there's a lot of activity that's been going on in Scandinavia. We know in the CIS They were shut out of Russia. They've been shut out of a bunch of countries, but there's still a lot of people we have to interview. Well, thank you very much, and we'll stay in touch.